Okay, here I'm going to demonstrate how to make a Photoshop action to adjust an image. And an action is essentially a macro. It's very much like a macro that you can create. And then you can take this action and apply it to any number of images in a batch process even. And so the way I approach this, I will take a kind of a central image like a view of downtown or something major like that, and try to adjust the image really well, and then apply the same settings to several other images and see how that looks. I don't know, 3 or 4 images in various areas, and if that looks good, fine. If I need to tweak it a little bit, I might then adjust it a little bit, and then from there apply it to maybe 10 or 12 images over a wide variety, urban, rural areas, just a wide variety of images, and see if there's some tweaking I need to do where it will provide good results over a wide variety of images. And then when I'm happy with that, then I'll have the I'll batch process the whole county or whatever images I have using the settings in the action that I made. So anyways, so let's start with this image, and see I have the actions panel here, and if that's not visible, you go under Windows, see Actions. Oh, there, I hit it. There, I showed it again. So you need that to be visible. And you also need the Adjustments tools visible, and again that's under Window, Adjustments. So let's show that. And you also should have the layers visible. So we have that visible also. So I have my image here. You can see it's kind of hazy looking. So the image is kind of hazy looking, and it kind of has a greenish tint to it. So the colors don't look quite right also. And all the images look similar to this. So there's a few adjustments I can make in the action, and then run it in a batch process, and the colors will be a lot sharper and more natural looking. So let's get started. So there's a couple things here. First of all, we have to do what's called create a new set. It's kind of, you could almost think of it like a folder almost for your action. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to call it Leon 2018. Give a descriptive name. So 2018 Imagery for Leon County. And so here's our essentially folder, and now I'm going to actually create the action. There we go. I don't know why I had to click it twice. And we can call it anything we want. I'm going to call it RGB color adjust because the image is an RGB image and I'm adjusting the colors, and it's within the set I just made, and I'm going to press record, and now it's actually, we're essentially recording a macro at this point. You see how that little dot, it's red, so we're recording. And so there are several adjustments to make with this image. The first thing I want to do is adjust the exposure. You see how the light parts of the image, even here, they look really almost washed out. And as I process the image, if I don't do anything about that, they'll be even more washed out, just really saturated looking, and it'll look really bad. So I have to actually go in as my first step here and adjust the so I have to adjust the exposure. So I'll click on that tool, the exposure tool. And you see there's a slider, and you can make it lighter. Look how things get really saturated. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to make it darker. And actually, I'm going to make a value of -1. So I accidentally, so I used the slider and it went to 1.01, and then I typed in -1, and so what it did, it put in the adjustment twice. So I only want it once. So what I can actually do, oh, well, I'll go back to that. Well, when I'm done recording, I'll actually, why don't I pause recording? We can stop recording right now. This will be a good lesson in how to edit an action. So doesn't really matter that much, but I want to get rid of this one here. So I'll drag that to the trash can. And so that just leaves the one I made. So yeah, I dragged one by the slider, and then I typed it almost the same value, and it entered the tool twice, and I only want the exposure tool to be in there in the macro one time. So what I had to do was temporarily stopped recording, and I just dragged the extra occurrence of the tool into the trash. And so now I'm ready to hopefully move on like nothing happened. So now I'm recording again. See the red light? I hope that wasn't confusing there. Um, I think because I'm doing a video recording while I'm um, doing all this, I think the controls are a little bit flaky too somehow. Anyways, I'll blame it on that, not user error. So the next thing I want to do is use the brightness contrast tool, and I want to, and this sounds counterintuitive, but I'm going to decrease the contrast by just a small amount. And what happens when I do some of the other adjustments later, the next adjustments I do, adjusting the histogram, adjusting the RGB values, will get rid of the haziness. And anyways, what I just did, adjusting the adjusting the exposure, and then adjusting the contrast down just a little bit, using those together will help make sure that the light areas in the image, when I'm done with all this, that the light areas in the image aren't oversaturated and just washed out and you can't see any detail. And it also helped the dark areas, the shadows, where it won't be completely dark. You'll be able to see things in the shadow areas. It won't just be too dark. So we're adding a little balance to the real light areas and the real dark areas with those two adjustments I just made. Okay, you can see the adjustments we made. They show up in the layers, and they also show up in the in our action, and we can expand on this, and it will show what we've done so far. So far we've so far we've just adjusted the exposure and the contrast, and so next let's adjust the curves, and this will really start to make a difference in the image. We'll adjust the histogram for each value, the RGB, red, green, and blue value of the image, and this is really where the main work happens. So I'm going to click on the Curves tool, and you see it. This shows our overall RGB histogram for the whole image. And I don't want that. I want to go to each color, starting with red. And you can see how the curve ramps up very rapidly at the beginning, and then it fades off gradually towards the end, and that's very common for each color. That's almost always how it works. And usually what winds up happening is, and you see the little teardrop sliders, and we'll bring those to right near where the histogram takes off and right near where it fades off into nothing, and we'll do that for each color. And doing that will get you very close to the adjustment you'll want, and then it's really a matter of fine-tuning it, literally going, tweaking it by just a slight amount can make a big difference then. So that's where it gets kind of interesting. And so we'll start with, like I said, start with one really important image like a downtown area, and find settings that really work well with that, and you can see it captured, it adjusted everything well, and then use more and more images with the same setting, and once it works well with several images from a variety of places, then try it with 10 or 12 images, and when everything looks good and you don't feel like you need to tweak it anymore, it's as good as it'll be, then you can go ahead and batch process your whole set of images. So anyways, well, so let's start with red, and I kind of pre-selected a value that would work really well, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. And you can use a slider, and you can also just enter a value. So I'm just going to use a slider here. And anyways, so that's red. You saw what I did there. I'm going to go to green next and do the same thing. And green, and then blue. And again, these were values that I had already looked at that seemed like they worked well, so I'm going to go ahead and use them. And you can see the colors look natural, although the image looks a little dark, and now we'll address that little problem. So, so I adjusted the curves. Now I'm going to make the image a little bit lighter. So I'm going to go to the exposure tool, and remember we used that at the beginning. Now we're going to go back to it, and this time I'm going to use the gamma correction, and again I picked a value that I think will work well on this, and I'm just going to plug it in there. And you see the image is a lot lighter looking. And in addition to gamma correction, I'm going to use the brightness tool, and I'm going to put in a value of about 6, I think. And then I'm going to do what's called flatten the image. And what that will do, that will collapse all these layers into the image. That kind of bakes in our changes, as it were, into the image. And we could zoom in if we want, and you can kind of see and one final thing I'll do. You notice I zoomed in and out, and it didn't say that in the macro. It's safe to zoom in and out and pan. One final thing I will do is what's called unsharp mask, and that's kind of an optional thing. And I won't get into all the whys and wherefores of the settings on that. There's things you can look up online regarding this tool, but this is kind of a moderate setting. You don't want to use too much of this, but it will basically sharpen the edges of the image without sharpening everything. So if you use this tool moderately, it can be nice. Again, I think it's kind of an optional step you may or may not want to use, but I'm going to go ahead and use it, and so I'll hit OK. And at that point, and you see it added an unsharp mask to the action, and at that point I'm done adjusting, and what I will do is stop recording right now. Stop recording the macro, that is. And we can look at the image. And this was taken during the winter, and right after a freeze, and so yes, the grass in a lot of areas was brown. So that is an accurate representation. I'm going to zoom out a bit more. And you see the rooftops on the buildings. They're white, but not oversaturated. Um, if I hadn't done that trick with at the beginning where I um, use the exposure and uh, use the contrast tool a little bit, probably this roof here would have been just almost all white. You wouldn't have seen much detail at all. Um, Certainly you wouldn't have seen much detail in the lighter areas of that roof. Um, so so that turned out to be a pretty good compromise. Um, and you see the shadow areas. You can um, see things in the shadows. And the streets look gray. They don't have like a greenish tint. Um, if you do your color adjustment and you see that the roads have kind of a greenish tint or a reddish tint, then you can suspect that your colors are off a bit, and you can look at um, like the yellow markings on the road. Look look at um, look at familiar things. If you have have imagery from an area you're familiar with and you know what what certain things should look like if you know that these rooftops should look kind of like a light off greenish color. Well, that's one sign. Um, Probably these white roofs should look uh, white, and they shouldn't look bluish white. That's another indication. So there's a lot of subtle things like that, and but before I would start adjusting this in Photoshop, I would look at the image in ArcMap using the different stretches and see if there's one stretch that gives you, kind of a good view of what the image should look like. So anyways, so let me zoom out, and in Photoshop, Control 0 will zoom you out to the full image. So that's doing our adjustments. So let's show all of our adjustments in our macro or our action. Let's just expand all that to show all the adjustments we did. Um, so you can see all the adjustments to the red and the green and blue. So one thing that's kind of confusing, at least in this version of Photoshop, when you uh, do what I did and enter value, like for example here, you see blue is in here twice. Well, we only adjusted the color once, right? But um, so but it's in there twice. Once was the beginning of the histogram where it ramped up, and then the other was the end of it where it kind of faded off to the right. So that's how that works. So that's kind of so it's in there twice. And that's how it shows up. I think on earlier versions when you made an action, it would just show the color, each color one time, and have both measurements just in there. And now it's like it's repeating, but you can see it's one value on the beginning on the left it's 42, and then on the end on the right it was 187. So it's in there twice, but it's really it's just that one instant when we adjusted the color on both ends, and same for green and red. So that's just kind of something that's a little different from earlier versions of Photoshop. Anyway, so that's an introduction on how to make a Photoshop action. And one thing I should mention, if you click on your action here and you go, you can actually export it, save actions. So you could export that as a file and give it to somebody, and they can import that into their copy of Photoshop, or you could have the file and have it backed up somewhere. So if something happened and you wanted to save your settings, then you would have it as a separate file backed up somewhere. So if something catastrophic happened to your installation, at least you could bring back the settings of this that you spent a lot of time making, and you would have it then. That's something important you might want to have. So anyways, so that's an introduction to making a Photoshop action for aerial imagery.